This Victorian Election Saturday. Please go downstairs, the bar is open, and I'm going to welcome to our illustrious podium Mr. Dean Brenham, and he is going to talk to us about Melbourne exploitation cinema and the like, I believe.
Hi, Brandon, thanks for coming along. Thanks, Zach. And once again, big thanks to Scott as well. It was a fantastic talk. Back to my childhood. In fact, it's also taken me back to stuff we're showing our 8-year-old daughter. Felt a bit bad as she's already seen that it was a part of Trilogy of Terror. And also the werewolf on the cruise ship episode of Kolchak as well. She's seen that too. She wants to watch Raw Kolchak. I've sort of told her now we might just hang off on that just for a little bit right now. I'm going to talk about Melbourne's cinemas, theatres that showed, well, sort of specialised, appeared specialising in trash cinema, horror, sex, basically exploitation films. Now, if I was to Now this is a map of Melbourne cinemas from around about cinemas that were in existence in the CBD from around about say 1970 to about 1982. Okay, all these cinemas at one point or another were operating in the CBD. This is not the only cinema. These are not the only cinemas that are operating. These are the cinemas that had some sort of specialising as trash cinemas, grindhouses in some cases. That's around about 25 cinemas. And of course there are far, far many more that were not displayed there, which were just showing mainstream sort of stuff. Only one of these venues is still in operation today. Now, a few words first before we get on with it. We're going to take a look at 5 cinemas in some detail. Then we're going to run through some others. But just a reason as to why there were so many of these venues happening in the 1970s is that up until that point, up until say the late 1960s, there was a virtual cartel held by Hoyts, Greater Union, and MGM. Both Hoyts and Greater Union had 8 screens in the CBD each, and MGM had 2. Very few others got a look in. There were a few, and they were showing all the mainstream stuff. They had all the stuff from the big distributors, from the major US studios, and even the big British films too, also captured by Hoyts, MGM, and Greater Union. The few other cinemas that were going were showing sort of art house stuff or newsreel programming, but they were accounting for very, very little of the audience. Then the late 1960s, about say 67, 68, this mob comes along called city cinemas. And they start opening small city theatres, or turning old newsreels into cinemas. And city theatres start showing a lot of exploitation. It's about all they can get their hands on. And city theatres, or city cinemas, are owned by a family known as the Kirby's, or who were the Kirby's. The Kirby's had started off in drive-ins, they moved into the cinemas, showing a lot of exploitation until they can start to get their name up, and they start getting deals with Warner Brothers initially, and then other companies. They got a lot of stuff early from American International Productions. City Theatres changes its name in around about 73 to Village, who are now, of course, the big international, multinational corporation they are today. And they get their start, initially in drive-ins, move into the city with exploitation, get a foothold, and their theatres are small, compact, low overheads, and they basically make a mess of Hoyts and Greater Union. So I'm going to look at 5 of these cinemas. Oh, there's also the fact too. In the 1970s, something happens in 1971 that helps exploitation cinema a hell of a lot. Can anyone think of what that is? 1971? Momentous occasion for film. Bingo. Thanks, Alex. The R rating comes in. Okay, so basically, there's a certain academic term for what you can then see on screen, which is the most important thing, and that's the academic tits. Tits. You can see tits on screen. Tits and bum is the main draw cards, but also naturally is horror. Certainly not to the extent in which you can see today. In the early 70s, depictions of horror. There's also stuff such as drug use, things that may be considered blasphemous, sacrilegious, homosexuality, promiscuity, and often all these things melded into one film alone. So that helps, enables exploitation cinemas to start popping up. And because so much of this stuff is being produced by independents and overseas or foreign European production companies, and they're selling dubbed versions to Australia, it allows all these little cinemas to start springing up. And also for a lot of older theatres to try and get in on the action, start also turning their programming over to this sort of material. So the first thing that I want to take a look at is, just to point it out a little better, is the Dendy and Collins Street. That's located at 241 Collins Street, it was located, actually down Manchester Lane. And a seating capacity of 250, and it operated between 1972 and 1987. Now the Dendy and Collins Street opens, in background first. The Dendy Corporation was one of the few independents getting a bit of a run on in the late 60s. They had a cinema down in Brighton known as the Dendy. Single screen cinema they did very well with by bringing a lot of foreign films. In the late 60s they open up a cinema they take over a cinema in Malvern, they also have one in Forest Hill and Dandenong. Can you believe an art house cinema was existing in Dandenong? Hard to believe, but it did run for a few years over Forest Hill. And then they thought they'd get into the city, try and get a bit of their art house product into the city. So they opened with the assassination of Trotsky, Joseph Losey's film with Richard Burton, Alain Delon. It bombed. Last 2 weeks, although it was very successful in the suburbs. These are the things to know. At the time, and probably still to this day, art house works in the suburbs, does not work in the city. Sex works in the city, and would probably work into the suburbs if it was allowed, but a lot of council restrictions and whatnot were making that very, very difficult. But art house was always a suburban thing. So they go with a couple of other things. There was a Louis Malle on there was a Bergman. None of these seemed to work. Their first long-running film was a Fulci. Lucio Fulci's A Lizard in a Woman's Skin plays for 5 weeks in the city. It does very well with itself. So they're starting to, there's a slightly arty-ish or artistic flair, horror, giallo-y, bizarre thing that it is. That starts to get an audience. So they start to think, right, okay, what are we doing here? They then put this thing on, which is a piece of utter bloody crap, if you've ever seen it. A French-Canadian sort of thing, comedy, sex comedy taking place at a camp, like a youth camp thing. And you can equate it to like a Porky's or American Pie. It's absolutely puerile. But lots of boobs and bums in it. And this is in late 1972, early 73. This thing, and if you get through 10 minutes of it, you're doing really, really well. It plays at the venue at Dendy Collins for 64 weeks. The only film, 64 weeks. It's not on double bills or playing at 9 in the morning or anything on its own. It's the only film in the venue for 64 weeks. We like to, we look back on the 70s as some sort of enlightened time, everybody very chi-chi and sort of, swinging and but they were watching a lot of shit. They were taking a hell of a lot of shit. This and money. Oh, you talk about crap. Following on from there, you have these two films, The Language of Love and More About the Language of Love. These films came in via the sense of they got through the sense of due to being educational. Because they were teaching, these were from Sweden or Denmark, one of those places. These films played, Denmark had 2 cinemas in the city by this point. The first one played for 80 weeks, the second one for 70-something weeks, and they kept bringing them back and back and back. It's funny, it turns up on video in the early 80s, and so by that point so surpassed that it vanishes without a trace. It's very... Oh, by the way, this is the film. The Language of Love is the film that, if you remember Taxi Driver, that when Travis Bickle goes on a date with Sybil Shepherd, who takes her to the porno cinema, that's the movie that they go see. And that's the one that she walks out of. So it's an educational film about basically better sex, how to have a better sex life. And they sort of, the ads, and there were so many of them at the time, they had these psychologists saying why this is such an important film, and the various free love experts and everything like that. When it was mentioned in Parliament, and all this sort of this about, what is their society coming to? So these become extremely successful, and it points to the Technicolours as to where the future is. So there's a lot of sex films, such as the erotic adventures of a lumberjack and all that's another hit, and all these sorts of things. But then they start to get a little bit dark. Things start to get a bit dark. Gets films on like Because of the Cats, which I'm sure Alex is aware of, as a rather notorious rape revenge film. Which they sort of seem to sell as a sex film, and featuring the Emmanuel Pet Sylvia Crystal, plus hot and naked. And you get this weird sort of thing happening in the late 70s, early 80s, where serious films, horror films, nasty films, drama films are sort of conflated with sex films, sexy films. I sort of wonder where the audience was sort of going at the time. So, you get films like Sister Emmanuel paired as a double feature with Nightmare. She sought refuge from her, from her, something or other? Whatever, something for her unique thirst for love with 2 innocent girls and a nightmare of rape and terror. I'll tell you what, there you go. So by the late 70s, they become very horror oriented. The House in Sorority Row plays there. Films such as Prom Night, Massacre at Central High. These are the first places they play. Also the likes of, I think it's a Bruno Mattei film, Hot Nights of Caligula. If this explicit film had been made in 3D, it would have been banned. Of course, that's on the coattails of the great Caligula, Malcolm McDowell, Timbo Bastard. Lots of various variations of Caligula porn floating around town. So the likes of the Horror Show, which was just like a clip fest of various horror films. The Great Bistro, that's where that got its Australian premiere. On a double feature for no extra cost, as it says, with Alone in the Dark, the Jack Palance classic. Here's the Mean E.T. Fantastic. Now, something actually Alex and I wrote about recently was talking about the origins of the film. I'm going to show a little still up here. This cinema deserves to go down in sort of the pantheon of great cinemas around Australia. For this very reason alone, the owners fought and got it through. And its Australian premiere was at the Dendy Collins Street. After 7 years, they got it out fully uncut into Australia, where it ran for 5 weeks before then going out into drive-ins. Sadly, the Technicolour Street closed. There's now a car park down Manchester Lane. The obvious thing that comes around in the 1980s and about 85, 86 is video is really hitting big time. And that pretty much finished up with the Collins. Let's move on to the penthouse. Now the penthouse is at 33 Swanston Street in the basement of the Nicholas building. Sort of on the corner of Flinders Lane and Swanston Street. Does anyone know the Nicholas building? Yeah. It's sort of it's a lovely old arcade that runs through with a lot of glass and things like that. Beautiful old bohemian building, wonderful place. This was located in the basement. You had to go down a set of stairs, these dark, dingy stairs to get to this place. It seemed capacity at 200. It only lasted 2 years. Possibly because it initially opens as an art house. It plays a film called Vices and Virtues, which is a Polish film. It's sort of sexy sort of thing to it, but very arty. As played at the film festivals and all that sort of thing. People are cool with that. It's just open there, that's fine. It's an art house sitting in the city. Very, very quickly it changes tack and goes straight for the form, straight for the masters. The problem with the penthouse was that to get down to the basement, if you pass the basement, if you pass that stairwell, well, it's the only entrance to McDonald's, which was the only city McDonald's at the time. And that McDonald's is now long gone. But that was where McDonald's management complained that kids had to go past the posters and that, advertising some of the films you're about to see the images of, and the council kicked the penthouse out. So you have films such as The Degradation of Emmanuel, the dirtiest live news show in town, first release High Voltage Erotic, Oregon She's Elegant Fantasy and Fun, Emmanuel in America. Now get this, plus Jess Franco's Jack the Ripper. Now, has anyone seen Emmanuel in America? Yeah. If you've never seen it, do so. It's not just your plain old Emmanuel film. It's one of those Joe D'Amato directed ones, in which she goes, I'm pretty sure I remember this right, she goes to investigate a snuff films that are being made. And there's some footage in there she has to look at and investigate, which is extremely vivid and looks very, very realistic and got the film into a lot of trouble. It's far more a horror film than it is a sex film. I'm not sure what condition it came out when the censors got their hands on it to Australia. It always actually reminds me of that. There's a quote by Charles Lawton during the making of Jamaica Inn. Jamaica is a Hitchcock film from the late 1930s where the production code people got onto it and had so they cut out a sequence where it's very much implied that there's an incest theme going on where he's actually having sex with his daughter in the film, the Lawton character. When told about this, Lawton said, well, they can cut the dialogue, but they can't take the glue out of my eye. So in other words, they can cut various scenes from these films, which they did. And many of you probably, as myself, certainly did back in the early 80s, looking at VHS at the time, you're getting these same copies that are eventually turning up on VHS. And you can see where the chops and the cuts and the hacks are. But it doesn't stop them from having such a sort of a sleazy sort of stench and feel to them. And the mere fact that they've got the cuts in them, you know where the cuts are, and you only start to imagine what the hell went on in those few frames that are missing, and you invariably probably imagine something far, far worse than what was actually occurring on screen, which might have been reasonably tame. Yeah, and like I said, Jack the Ripper is playing as the support feature. That was its only release. That's a Jess Franco film with Klaus Kinski. So you can imagine going down this dingy stairwell to get to this poxy little cinema in this really decrepit, decaying building to see that double. That's just beautiful. It's a thing of art. It's just a beautiful thing. Oh, well, here we go. I mean, when you talk about quality, Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals. In the flesh, her most erotic adventures yet. Well, you know, the erotic scenes of people's stomachs being pulled out and chewed by cannibals. I mean, it gets me going all the time. But it's with the Black Emmanuel goes east. So the notion of selling these horror films as sex films simply on the Emmanuel name. It's just fabulous. Oh, and you talk about classy and tasteful. Love Train for the SS. But wild sexual experiences on board the Love Train for the SS. Take that train on board. Yeah, plus overexposed. Yeah. So it was not long after that the penthouse got the arse from the Nicholas building, was never to be seen again. What I will say though is, for most of its life, it was a village cinema. So it was a village, you know, makers of family-friendly films today. They were the ones who ran the lease in the penthouse and were the ones screening this sort of stuff. It's not something they want to talk about these days. It's their dirty little secrets, these sorts of things. I will say, actually this was the second last week. I'm not sure whether they were trying to buy some time or trying to curry favour. In the final week of the penthouse, so this was the second last week, its final week was Stormboy. Could you imagine sending your kids down to this hole, this bloody hole? You go down there, they've taken down all the posters for Love Train for the SS, put up Mr. fucking Percival or whatever his name was on the thing. Go down there, kids, you know, we'll come and get you later. Just be careful if you stick to the seats afterwards. Now, the granddaddy of them all, and still going to this very, very day. The Crazy Horse, which many of you may well know, you may well have visited, you may well have attended, you may well have enjoyed yourself there. I just popped in for, you know, pure research purposes. It is currently Melbourne's longest continuously running theatre. Been operating since 1951, initially as a newsreel house. That is now showing hour shows of newsreels, cartoons, short comedies, hits, old Charlie Chaplin things, or whatnot like that. Located at 34 Elizabeth Street in the basement of Carlo House, as a seating capacity, or did then at 234. It was somewhat diminished seating capacity these days because they had to extend the stage for the girls to dance and to put the pole in as well. For the girls to dance around, only to get 100 seats these days. Now in 1963, they actually go to a feature film policy. And the delights of the many, many films you could find during that time were Blonde in Bondage, For 4 Shillings Any Time, The Notorious Drug Racket. Now, my darling mother is here today. She's come along. She may well be the more senior people. It's age 79 very soon to have attended Monsterfest. Not quite, no, very soon. But she told me that she went shortly after arriving in Australia in the early 1960s. My mum actually went to see this, going by the ads in the paper. Didn't you go to see Mau Mau Blood Feast? Did you tell me that? Down at the Star Theatre. It's a sort of a Mondo movie about the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. Has anyone seen Herschel Gordon Lewis's Blood Feast movie? Yeah. If you look at the font used for Blood Feast, is exactly the same as off the H.G. Lewis poster. Now that film would never have been allowed in Australia at the time in the early 60s. They would never allow Blood Feast in, it's far too gory. So they simply just ripped off the poster. This is from a completely different film, Mau Mau. So Blood Feast was actually not playing it. But they play some amazing films at the Star. Primitive London, the offbeat, the aggressive, the uninhibited, the scintillating, the intriguing. That should be the thing for Monsterfest next year. That's the tagline here. Karamoja, Land of the Naked People. Indescribable and unbelievable and too long didn't read on the side. But you've got horror stuff there, the Gorgon. If you can't take it, don't see it. New shock sensation. But there's some landmark films there. The first time Mario Bava, anyone's Mario Bava fan here? I hope so. If you're not, you should be. Appeared in Melbourne, Blood and Black Lace. With the rather raunchy but probably cut film Seven Daring Girls playing there too. Phantom of the Rue Morgue, that's an old, they were dragging out old 50s B films and then dressing them up as something new. By the early 70s though, they latched on to the boobs and bums as well. They knew where the money was, it wasn't really in horror. So you end up with the likes of Mondo Mob, outstrips Mondo Car, sensual, sadistic pleasures of the get-off generation. And you can see it's actually retitled from being Teenage Outlaw, because that had played at the cinema 2 years earlier. So get another run out of the film under a different title. And by the 70s, of course, they'd actually become well entrenched in the sex film ethos and playing such classics as Make Them Yoda Lady. Do anything or dare anyone. They never met a man they couldn't handle. Scenery to make the eyes bottle, no doubt. The star becomes the crazy horse in 1985, 86, and now has a hardcore policy and continues on to its very day. I'll zap this along pretty quickly. In Albany, located at 232 Collins Street. Then from 1938 to 1989, a bit like the start was a newsreel theatre, changed to a feature film policy in the late 1960s. With lots of Dracula films. This is a good place to see Hammer films. Hammer films, Dracula's Visitor from the Grave, Dracula AD 1972, The Satanic Rites of Dracula, all these had their Melbourne premieres at the Albany. And even such classics as Joan Crawford in Trog played there. And Dr. Fives rises again. This is when they were day and dating and driving, so they're opening the drive-ins and cinemas at the same time. Frogs, a beautiful, wonderful Ray Milland classic, was playing there. Then you also get stuff. The Black Belt. Asia's answer to Bruce Lee. I thought that Bruce Lee was Asia's answer to Bruce Lee. I'm reading over there. Australia's answer to Dean Brandon. So lots of martial arts films and that played there. Also the likes of Deadly Weapons, which if you've never seen, you really must. It's just pretty sure what a clip it is in. I showed this in a class once at the trial. It was, she has this, it's chesty morbid, she has these boobs, massive. Can't act for a while, but she has these great boobs. And she's a secret agent, and she has cameras implanted in her nipples. So she takes photographs of microfilm and all the sorts of, and she beats men to death with them to the sides. You've really got to see it. They actually have a sequel called there was a sequel. Wasn't it Special Agent 44 or something like that? It's in 44. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So but it was still playing films. It moved into the sex film market too. You can see that little logo changes to a girl down there, but they were showing that sort of stuff as well. These sorts of things. Mondo style stuff in the 70s. Zapping along as quickly as I can now, go to the Galaxy, which was renamed the Liberty. Well, it actually was a Liberty, turned to Moderno Cinema, became the Galaxy, then the Liberty again. As we're moving out of the city now, just very briefly, to Logan Street, Brunswick, landmark place, opened 1937, closed in 1988. Films are played here and played nowhere else. They had this amazing double features. The Boss with Henry Silvers, showing a lot of Italian films and Greek films, dubbed into Greek film Ransom Baby, the Shock Thriller of the Year. She Knew No Other Way, I bet she didn't. And Caliber 9, which is a terrific, so I think it's one of those DeLeo crime thrillers. Bloody Virgin, which is tastefully wicked. Yeah, the title itself is tastefully wicked. So big that it actually opened at 2 cinemas at once, the Ascot Vale as well. Then you end up with the likes of Jess Franco's Exorcism, playing with the Giallo Lusty Lovers, played out in the Galaxy, which is a really ramshackle old cinema, and possibly the greatest title for any film ever, Devils of Violence and Sex, which is a Greek film